Good. Great to have you. You know, I haven't seen too many requests this year, but the one that you've got is really odd.
What do you mean?
Why do you need 2 gallons of milk for 10 sauces? I don't get that.
Well, it's not for me. I'm lactose intolerant.
Oh.
It's for them.
Them? Here? Oh, they're going to be drinking. They're going to be drinking. Oh, the last time we had that much drinking was when Danny DeVito was here.
The View starts right now. Clinton and Trump take New York. Will Bernie bow out? Will Cruz lose gracefully? Don't count on it. And Katherine Heigl is getting catty when she hits the Hot Topics table. Then, here comes trouble. Alicia Witt has a sneak peek of how she's getting naughty on Nashville. It all starts now on The View with Whoopi, Michelle Collins, Joy Behar, Candace Cameron Bure, Raven Simone, and Paula Ferris. Now, let's get things started.
My name is no, my sign is no, my name is no. You need to let it go. You need to let it go. Need to let it go. My name is no, my sign is no, my number is no. You need to let it go. You need to let it go. You need to let it go.
Hello and welcome to The View.
We have frightened the kittens.
Well,
look at their fright.
Wait. First of all, Sunny Hostin is here at the table again. So we say that. And as far as the Pussycats are concerned, we want to thank our sponsor, Cat's Pride. We have adorable kittens hanging out with us for the entire show. They're all up for adoption at the Mainline Animal Rescue in Pennsylvania. So check out our website for more information on how to adopt one of these cuties. You want to adopt?
Hold one?
Yes.
Can I pick one up for the show? Am I allowed to go over?
No, don't.
Oh my God.
I kind of want one, but
Come out.
you know, it's
Oh, he's gonna run? Oh, I hope not.
21 years.
Oh my God.
You had a cat for 21
I had a cat
years?
for 21 years, Cleo, and when she died, I've never been able to get another cat.
I understand. I had a dog
but I
that
love
was
him.
my baby. His name was Shoddy Pimp. And Shoddy Pimp, he went on tour with me. He would perform with me while I was performing, and he died.
Oh.
And tragically, I tried to get another dog, and I never could love the same.
It's very, very difficult.
hard.
I was
Cleo
just
died.
home visiting my parents, and they
Let's
have a
not talk
cat.
about any more dead animals today, please.
Minky is alive, but she is very obese, and when I pick her up, it's like picking up an ottoman covered in fur. She must weigh 20
I
pounds.
think you should put them
because
back.
I saw a picture
Put
of
the
the cat.
cats back now, girls.
No, Joy, no.
But
Joy,
Joy,
just-
well, Joy,
Come on, it'll soften up our political analysis.
Yeah, let's talk about
morning,
Trump.
okay?
You know who's a big Trump fan?
Joy, what did
This
you
guy.
do?
But Joy, yeah, you went to Cuba.
I went to Cuba. They have loose dogs all over the place there. A lot of loose dogs. I was in Cuba for a few days. Yes, I was. And let me just tell you about it a little bit. It was interesting. I mean, I have pictures. The one thing you have to know about Cuba, it's very Americanized. When I got there, I went to a restaurant that Obama had just been to. And there was another restaurant with a picture of the Rolling Stones, you know? And then, who did I run into in the hotel? Usher. Look at-
Usher?
the Usher.
Wow.
Usher!
Usher was at the hotel.
That's amazing.
Now you can see by the schmata on my head that it's very humid there.
What was your sense of the country?
My sense of the country is that it's a beautiful country in tremendous disrepair. That communism has not worked. It's like open marriage. It has not worked.
But do you think it's been good? Would you go again?
I would
and,
go
and
again. The
support
people are beautiful
communism?
and wonderful, and they have an
Is she
underground.
supporting communism just because she goes to Cuba, or is she supporting
the
going to
question.
the country?
You're supporting the people there.
She's supporting the people.
You're
no,
supporting the
absolutely.
people, but do you feel in some senses that she is supporting communism? There are a lot of people still that are locked up in prisons, and they need to have a voice too. Do you?
Well, you better tell that to Smokey Robinson and Usher and the Rolling Stones and President
Yeah.
Obama and me that we're supporting What kind
No,
of a
but
stupid
I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying. Do you feel in some senses, because you said that the country is still very, very deprived?
Yeah.
It's just a
But
question.
it's
Do you feel?
it's also going there and showing them other sides of
That's
the
good,
world and
yeah.
letting those other people know that there are other things out there, especially if, you know, they're not able to go and search for new ways of living.
Listen, I grew up in Miami, which is the Cuba of America,
Yeah.
and I was just there right now for my vacation. There are so many Cubans there who can now see family. I mean, it's actually a great thing that they're allowing people to go
There are three
there.
senators, Menendez, Cruz and a little Marco Rubio.
Little Marco.
They are blocking the fact that we still have an embargo there. We should lift the embargo there and help the people. They're not angry with us. They should be, maybe, but they're not.
Are the Cubans blaming America
Not
for
really.
the disrepair?
A lot of them blame Fidel. I mean, the system has not worked. The infrastructure is falling apart there. But there's great art. There's great music. The houses are falling apart, but it's beautiful architecture that's got to be repaired. They need money. They need help.
There.
And every day is a
capitalist system.
They do love Che Guevara. I have a picture. He's all over the place. There's a picture of Che Guevara.
Wow.
He's everywhere. And you know, you
Is
can't.
that a Banksy? It looks kind of good, actually.
No,
It does look like a Banksy.
You know, they don't have any pictures of Fidel Castro because he's still alive. They're waiting for him to die. Then they'll put the pictures up.
Well, he, at this point, it's like Weekend at Bernie's. Did you see Fidel? They wheeled him out. And again, you always say Weekend at Bernie's with him because he's so old. I had a beautiful night.
The main thing that was so impressive there is the cars. The cars are from 1959. That was the last time any cars were bought there.
And they've maintained
Look
it,
at that car. It's like little jewels riding around Havana.
You know they're trying to get Uber in Cuba now. I was just discussing with my brother. I'm not being funny.
serious?
On my life, they're trying to get Uber there, which I think would be a great idea because it would be a way for these people to work and kind of a novelty. I hate to say it, but as an American to get picked up in an Edsel can't happen outside of Glendale.
Any
you know?
foreign investment, 51% is owned by the Cuban government.
Okay.
So it's a little bit
complicated.
Yeah.
I want to say also a quick shout out. I had a beautiful night last night. I went to the 8th annual Blossom Ball hosted by the wonderful Padma Lakshmi, and it's supporting the endometriosis. Thank you. Oh, there I am.
Love the dress.
Let's forget the dress. It's supporting the Endometriosis Foundation of America, which is a very scary disease that so many women suffer from, and there isn't enough money for research. There's sort of a stigma around a lot of diseases that relate to the reproductive area. People are afraid to talk about it and look into it. It's an amazing foundation, and I urge everyone to check out the website.
Okay, let's talk politics now. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump scored huge hometown victories in New York yesterday. Here's what they had to say. Watch.
Today, you proved once again there's no place like home. The race for the Democratic nomination is in the home stretch, and victory is in sight.
Senator Cruz is just about mathematically eliminated. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, New York. We love New York.
Okay. Did they sound any different to you?
They
From
sounded
what
different.
they've been saying.
They sounded different to me. I mean, I think we saw a Hillary that was so much more comfortable up there. You know, she sort of was bopping her head to Empire State of Mind, which I thought was something that we haven't seen her be that way. And for Trump, I'm going to say it again, he seemed much more presidential this time.
Oh, no, stop.
I know.
Oh, please.
But think about it.
This is painful to hear.
I know, Joy, but when I listened to him, I actually understood what his main policy points were. He talked about, you know, the immigration, but he also talked about strengthening the military. I felt like, who is this Donald Trump that's in front of me?
That's the influence of Paul Manafort, and that's the influence of Rick Wiley, whom he just hired, and he's shaking up his staff a little bit. But there's no denying this was his biggest win yet in New York. He's got another Super Tuesday, Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania coming up next Tuesday.
And it was more political.
It was much more political. And Cruz, he's right. He is mathematically eliminated. But for me, I was frustrated. I'm a registered independent. If you have a closed primary, and there are closed primaries all around this country right now, and you can't forget, a lot of independents are voting for Bernie. You guys, we're shut out. We are shut out.
What about the people that are voting for Jill Stein or, let's say, Gary Johnson? People that are actually running for president as well.
Are those made-up names?
No, they're not. They just, it's just that the populace will not pay attention to the Green Party or the Libertarian
Well, they
Party.
have no traction.
It doesn't, but why don't they have traction?
You know
why?
They're speaking,
The media.
The media. They are speaking in ways
I
that
blame the media, but
I
to
love
your
blaming the
point,
media.
that's you do.
Oh, I blame the media for everything.
We are the media.
That's right.
Okay.
I blame us
Just
for
say
most
it.
of the world's
But
problems.
Raven's point was really interesting because you mentioned it in the morning meeting that, you know, you got online and got on a website.
There's a website called isidewith.com, and I found this out from actually Gary Johnson. He was having an interview on CNN. I'm like, who is this man? He's running for president. I went on there. I realized that I'm more of a Green Party voter than I am a Democrat. I'm more of a libertarian than I am a Democrat. And it's really interesting to find out all those people that are voting, and then we get mad. Why? Because we're only paying attention to
But
these
you have
people.
to put your vote towards the people, in my opinion, who actually have a chance.
That's right.
So while
No, I have to
I have to
who I want to be
That's
president.
right. That's right. But that person, listen, Gary Johnson, whoever this man is, I'm sure he's
amazing.
lovely.
Check
I
him
know.
out.
I've never heard of him. It
Check him
sounds
out.
like a Family Guy name to me, but I mean, fine.
Check him out.
You know, they were also saying that a lot of millennials didn't vote in this primary.
Yeah.
And my theory about that is that these politicians are so overexposed right now. Every time you turn on the TV, everything is Hillary, Bernie, Trump, Cruz. All day, every day. I'm saying if you're the most famous celebrity in the world, Tom Cruise, and you had to see Tom Cruise every day, you would not see his next Mission Impossible. You'd be like, I'm sick of Tom
See, but
Cruise.
Donald-
And that's how we feel with these politicians. It's too much.
It's too much.
Donald Trump is now calling Hillary crooked Hillary. That's his new. Watch for that.
is-
So she needs a name for him. What do you think? How about racist Trump?
No, you've got to go.
How about misogynist, racist Trump?
It's not
Go
just, it
for
needs
it,
to
Hillary.
rhyme. It
Are you
has to
done
rhyme.
yet?
Like,
Crooked Hillary doesn't rhyme.
well, but that's because
Yeah.
it's Trump's
I mean,
thing. You want it to
You
count?
could do
Ryan
Crooked
Ted-
Clinton and go with the alliteration, and then you could do Teflon Trump. You could do Toupee Trump.
How do you explain
Oompa, yeah, like,
Says
two-way
that's his
Trump is
hair.
good.
I know, it is his hair.
They don't have to
can't
be
do
name
Trump.
calling like they do. We're stooping to their level, you guys. Name calling is, I thought that was a child's
Well,
game.
it worked for him. It worked for him.
It's
Did
a
you
child's
notice
game.
that?
I'm
it's
sorry,
not
I
working
stopped
for Bernie.
acting like that when I was
No,
12.
it's not
Funny
working for
enough, when Bernie does it against Hillary, which is happening quite a bit lately, where Bernie's getting a little bit, I think, bitter towards her, it's not making him look like a better candidate.
Yeah.
I think it's making him look actually like he's
Well,
losing, which is what's happening.
Bernie's kind of
point.
like the Ralph Nader of it at this point, so keep that in mind when you vote. We'll
Yeah,
be right
buckle
back with more Hot Topics.
Could watching porn affect your relationship with God in a good way? Find out later. The View's Hot Topics are getting hot. Hello. And just wait till you see what we do next.
Wait, ding the bell for me. Thank you.
Smart, funny, fearless. The place to be heard is The View. It's The View on ABC. Still ahead, Katherine Heigl hits the table. Plus, Alicia Witt has a sneak peek of how she's shaking up Nashville.
Welcome back. And if you hear a lot of meowing, it's because there are cats on the premises, and there's a lot of cross meowing, if you know what I'm saying. Now, okay, let's do this topic.
My claws are out.
Yeah, we're cat fighting.
Oh, look at this. Schools have started banning games like musical chairs. Can you believe it? And Duck Goose, I never heard of that, because the focus on getting rid of the weakest link makes kids
Oh, my
feel
gosh.
left out.
What?
Oh, is that? It depends
That
on how old
is
they
a
are.
good idea. I hate
so ridiculous.
musical
I hate that
chairs.
game. I hate that
It
game.
is the game of Mean Kids. I'll never forget when I was in kindergarten and I was playing musical chairs at Lizette's birthday party in the South Bronx in the projects. The apartment was like this big, and Pablo threw me off the chair, and I
boy.
spent the entire time
maybe-
standing up against the wall. And it is a Mean Kid freaking
You
game.
can throw an elbow against Pablo.
Can I just say
It's
something?
such a mean
I have to
awful game.
disagree with you, Sunny, because it's one of the few sports I was unbelievably good at. I'm like the Dwayne The Rock Johnson of musical chairs because I'm Gandalf sized, so I like have long
And
legs. I get very quick.
You knock kids out.
No. Let me tell you something. I was not good at anything, and I was actually not a popular kid. And I remember I went to this like very dorky camp one summer, and musical chairs was the only thing that I won. So it actually made me feel good for once as a child. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I was great at it. And yes, I will knock a bitch to the ground. You know me.
I mean, it's like you might as well play dodgeball.
I hate
That's a
dodgeball.
mean game too.
I
I don't
run a lot of
understand the
dodgeball.
purpose of musical chairs. Like, I never understood it in school. It wasn't fun.
No.
I get bruises at the end of the game. I just don't understand it and how that helps team building.
I think for me, it's like you have to listen very closely for when the music stops, and then you got to move. And listen, when you're being chased down the street by a gunman, musical chairs will come in handy. When you got to move, remember back.
No, Michelle, that's more like Black Friday practice. That's
I don't
okay. Musical
understand
chairs
that.
is Black Friday.
I'm with you, Michelle, though. I think the culture of every kid has to have a prize and every kid needs to win. I think it's totally ruining our children. I think that we need to tell them, you know what? It's Sunny's birthday and she gets a gift. And sometimes it's about other people and it's not about you. And I'm sorry, second place is still losing, but you gave a great effort. Like, just, are you
serious?
You are a tiger mom. You are a tiger mom.
I am a tiger mom, definitely. I mean,
It doesn't go against your persona, I'll say that.
Yeah,
I mean,
we've all
it does,
talked about
rather,
it.
to say that you're against musical chairs.
Yeah,
Because that normally would be something that you would dig. Competition amongst people.
Competition,
You like
yes.
that.
I think you do your very, very best.
Right.
But that kind of game, where Pablo just throws me off to the
because
corner.
you know why?
I mean,
Because as
it
Michelle
teaches you you're a
pointed out,
loser.
might makes right. She is bigger than everybody, so she can knock people
I'm a
over.
full monster.
Yeah.
It's true. And I will, on this panel, let's talk about musical chairs. Let's talk about it here.
But to go what Paula said, honestly, I don't think it's fair, actually. If you want to be involved in a winning, losing type of game, then yes, there should not be this blanketed statement of everybody's winning. But musical chairs is not something you get a medal for.
That's not true. I got a pin. You were wrong. No, I'm sorry. I did. I remember I won. I came home.
She
I
just
really
loves
like it.
it.
I love sitting and I love music.
She's like
so why wouldn't I like
she's
it?
like the Donald Trump of musical chairs. And when we come back, we're going to talk about why cheating, listen to this one, I love this topic. Cheating, you know, on your husband or your wife may not be a deal breaker anymore. How do you like that? We'll be right back.
I love it.
Yeah, look at the topic. According to a friend of mine who blogs, Marianne Garvey, more women are letting their men mess around these days. More than they used to.
I'm happy for them. Let me tell you why.
Is cheating a deal breaker for you?
No. I know I'm not married, but I've had my fair share of heterosexual relationships. And I always said, you're allowed to have 3 times. Because every single man or boy or person I've ever dealt with always complains about the relationship they're in, that I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do this. I give them that option. You're allowed. Now, if you do something, I need to know who it is. You better get tested, and you got a 3-month quarantine period.
Oh my God.
Wow.
That's so sexy.
They might as well just go to prison.
But they have that option.
So it's not a deal breaker for you in a committed relationship.
In a committed relationship, it's not a deal breaker.
only
I just
3
need to know who it is. Only 3 times.
The 4th time?
Well, after that, especially if it's the same person, there's an emotional connection. That means that we can no longer
You know
talk.
something? I have a feeling that the reason that women are accepting it more than they used to, that's really the subject, is because 54% of women are also cheating.
Wow.
I think that's why they're accepting it.
Because
it's
I
like,
don't
you know, and why now? Because years ago, women didn't work as much. Now you go to work, you know, at the offices where Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Except around here, of course.
See, I don't know. I mean, Paula and I are, 3 of us are married, but it's such a deal breaker for me. It's not a deal breaker for me at all.
It's not a deal breaker
It's not
for
a deal
me
breaker.
either.
But
It's
why,
not?
No.
It's not,
But
no.
why be in a committed relationship?
Exactly.
If you're going to cheat, why be in a marriage if you're going to cheat? I mean, let's face it.
Because it's the
My
sex with
husband
the same
cheats. He doesn't
person
want to
all the
come.
time.
But he doesn't
Yeah,
want to
but
come
sex
home
can
if
get
my
better,
husband cheats
sweetie.
because I'm going to make his life freaking miserable.
Okay, deal.
I'm going to make his life
There you go.
miserable, and he's going to be in some therapy, and he's going to hate the therapy. But am I going to let that, you know, break up my family? I don't think so.
I'm surprised that Paula says it's not a deal breaker.
Well, I mean, in the Bible, it gives you grounds for divorce if you cheat on somebody. But I've had a lot of friends. This is a situation close to me, and I know that you can come back better and stronger, and it doesn't have to necessarily ruin your
Did
relationship.
that happen to you?
No, I mean, but it's happened to it's happened, like very close in the
Friends of
circle.
mine too, and I will say that I actually think one of the reasons that women are more accepting of it is because it's so talked about now. I feel like 50 years ago, no one ever discussed cheating. It wasn't, and now it's everywhere you look. You open up any tabloid, celebrities cheating on their wives, and it's because it's so discussed. I think women almost, I hate to say it, but they want to almost be in on the joke, if that makes any sense. Like, well, if you're going to do it, at least tell me about it. Let me know about it so I don't look stupid.
And there's a difference between
Maybe there's
emotional
some kind
and
of
physical.
safety there.
But there's a difference
would you-
between emotional and physical, and I think that those women are like, okay, that's just physical. Maybe I can cut that off. Emotional is
But
totally
you know,
different.
it never works
Do you think
because
the
women get jealous. Open relationships, I believe, many times are doomed to fail. Now, live your
No,
life,
it
do
depends
what you
on
want to
who
do.
you
I
are.
don't care.
No,
But
it just depends on who
But
you are.
I have a question for you then, Raven. Are you saying that the emotional affair is worse than the physical
Of course.
affair?
Yes,
Yes,
the
it is.
emotional
Of
affair is
course.
much worse because I want you there mentally. I want you there mentally because in the end, we're sharing, and I know this is more than just, there's more to marriage than just this, but we're sharing finances. We're sharing
Children.
finances. We're sharing children.
Yeah.
You're sharing a lot more than just physical with me, and I want to make sure all those other things, you know, you got to come home
Does
at the end
this
of the
sound
day.
misogynistic or sexist if I say that women get emotionally involved faster than men when they're having an affair? I do believe that.
I just think it's true.
I think women get more involved when you're sleeping with someone.
Period.
It's hard to leave
Yeah.
yourself emotionally out of it. I'm speaking
That's
as
why-
a woman.
No, it's not.
That's why
Real
I have so many
easy.
problems.
I feel like the physical.
Because I'm like, is he on
you,
Facebook?
goodbye.
Let's find out. I'm on it.
I'm out. Bye.
They say though.
I gotta go.
It's true. I get emotional.
That Facebook stuff is very, very dangerous. And when you're talking about an emotional affair, I think the emotional affair is bad, but it can lead to the physical affair. I have a friend, I'm not going to out her by name.
Kind of.
Funny.
But she told us her name already.
But, yeah, I told you girls her name. But she got...
Has she been on this panel?
No, she got on Facebook and she started Facebooking with an ex-boyfriend. And she was like, oh my God, he was like my high school crush and he's so fabulous and we're sending each other pictures. Then it went to phone calls.
Oh.
I didn't tell her husband. Somebody told her. I really didn't. Someone else told her husband, and now they're in therapy, and it's all jacked up, and it's all messed up, and it started because of Facebook. Like I think social media.
So
is
it's
also
all Mark
making it easier.
Zuckerberg's
Maybe
fault,
she
is what
shouldn't
you're
have.
saying,
Maybe
right?
she shouldn't have left him in the first place. Maybe she chose the wrong guy, and that's why her feelings are coming back.
No.
You know what,
I-
Raven?
Oh.
I feel that. Read Modern Love in the New York Times. Every week it's people going back to their high school boyfriends. They were married, it didn't work out, and then they married their high school boyfriend.
I'm just
Going
saying,
back.
my
Please
mom's
call
going
me.
through that right now.
Anyone. All my high school guys. I'm here.
It's just a reminder. No, it's just a reminder though that like you shouldn't give that little opening.
This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
And we are coming on the air now with the latest on that horrific event in Dallas overnight. 5 police officers gunned down by at least one sniper in Dallas overnight. It came at near the end of what had been a peaceful protest against those killings by police of some black men earlier this week. 5 officers have been killed, 7 officers injured, 2 civilians also injured, 3 suspects now in custody, and 1 shooter identified as Micah Xavier Johnson, 25 years old, has been killed by police. We're waiting for the Attorney General Loretta Lynch now to give a press conference in Washington, but I want to get more now on that shooter from ABC's Pierre Thomas, our senior justice correspondent. Pierre, the shooter just been identified, 25 years old, as I said, an Army reservist up until last year.
Exactly, George. We're still gathering more information about him. We're looking at some potential Facebook postings from this young man in which he expressed a lot of anger toward police. Still getting more information on that, George. And we expect the Attorney General to talk about assets and resources that the FBI will be bringing to bear to assist the local police. Again, this is a critical moment. They need to make sure that there's nothing bigger outside of this relatively small group of people that they're looking at right now. Again, 3 suspects, as you said, that they're looking at. Again, they're being tight-lipped according to the mayor, so we don't know yet if they actually are part of the plot or simply knew something, didn't tell law enforcement. That's all to be determined, but law enforcement around this country is now on high alert because they need to make sure that this is contained to Dallas.
We also know from the Dallas Police Chief David Brown, he said that the shooter, in those several hours of negotiations with the police before he was blown up by that police robot bomb, talked about his motivations. He said he wanted to kill white people, especially white officers. He said he was motivated by this Black Lives Matter movement, and that would make these statements would presumably make this a subject of a federal civil rights investigation as well.
Exactly, George. A racially motivated shooting, that being the reason to kill someone, that would potentially bring in a civil rights investigation. Again, law enforcement has been concerned that all of the debate that we've been having back and forth about policing and race could lead to a situation like this. But today, they're now focused on trying to help the police in Dallas, but also, again, trying to make sure there are no copycats. Police, again, George, around this country on high alert to make sure that the officers are safe.
And Brad Garrett, let's talk more about this police operation overnight, former FBI special agent. And we found out from the police chief, David Brown, that after these several hours of negotiation, they finally reached a determination that they had to actually send that robot bomb in there to take the shooter out.
And George, what's going to happen is that at some point, the negotiators are basically going to switch from, I'm going to try to talk you out, to I'm going to try to gain more information so we can tactically move on you. And I think that's what happened. And the assessment was made probably by the on-scene SWAT commander that, look, He says he has explosives. We can't rule one way or the other. We're not going to take a chance. He's already killed a number of us. So they send a robot in with an explosive device that ultimately kills him, which is not something we hear about every day, but I can understand under the circumstances maybe they felt like there was no other choice.
And we are looking at a live picture now of Micah Johnson's house being searched in Mesquite, Texas. And Brad, we know from the police chief as well that Mr. Johnson said he acted alone, said he didn't have any accomplices, but we also have these 3 suspects in custody right now. And the police chief seemed to be going back and forth between suggesting that that might be the case, that he was acting alone, and that others might be involved.
Well, I think that's a management call in that we don't know for certain. I mean, if you take Mr. Johnson at his word, and there's been some reporting, George, that he arrived at the scene in his mother's SUV, assume that is true, that would maybe lend itself more that he's a lone shooter, which clearly could have committed this act alone. So the 3 people in custody may well be folks that were sort of on the edge of this, decided they're not going to be cooperative with the police, and until they can clear them, they're going to hold them.
Right, so they are being tight-lipped. The police are being tight-lipped as well. I want to go to Philip Mena, who is on the scene in Dallas right now. As we've been reporting, that city's still on lockdown. And in many ways, Philip, the whole city of Dallas still an active crime scene.
Yeah, absolutely, George. As a matter of fact, right now we are only 2 blocks away from that parking garage where the deadly confrontation between the suspect Micah Johnson and police took place. Investigators have, as you mentioned, shut down a large swath of downtown Dallas county government buildings and many businesses in that area that are closed in that area, while investigators continue to search for any evidence that might support or dismiss Johnson's claims that he acted alone, as he told police. Now, as you mentioned, there were 3 other suspects who were detained by police. One of them, a woman who was detained in that very same parking lot. But investigators will be trying to determine what their role in all of this was. George?
And so far, they haven't said a word about it. Okay, Philip, thanks very much. I'm here with our senior legal correspondent, Sonny Hostin, as well. And what a remarkable week, Sonny. We have the shooting by police in Louisiana of a man who was selling CDs but was armed. We have this shooting in Minnesota, that one captured on live stream. The protests crop up in response to that, and then this kind of targeting.
It really has been remarkable. And you know, I think that these fatal shootings by police officers is up about 6% just this year. And so this is an issue that is ongoing. This is an issue that is ongoing, especially in the African-American communities, because we know that African-Americans are shot 2.5% at a rate 2.5% more than their white counterparts. And so this has been a real issue. We haven't been focused on the issue because I think the national attention has been on this sometimes very bizarre election. But when you also look at the other side of this, George, the bottom line is that because of video cameras, because of smartphones, a lot of these officers that are involved in these shootings are being charged with murder and manslaughter. I mean, from 2009 to 2014, you only had 47 officers charged. Just in 2015, 18 officers have been charged. In 10 of those cases, you had video evidence.
Those videos are making all the difference.
They're making all the difference. And so I know there's this feeling in the African-American community that change is not afoot. That is not necessarily true, because officers are being held responsible for these actions, but certainly this week has just brought the focus back on these fatal police shootings.
No question about that. And John Carl, as Sonny mentioned, this comes right in the middle of the presidential campaign. It also comes in the middle of President Obama's trip overseas to meet with European leaders in Poland. But in the last 24 hours, he's had to speak out twice on these shootings and killings.
He spoke out almost immediately after landing last night to the situation in Minnesota. And then, George, just a few hours after he made that statement, the shooting happened in Dallas. Now I know White House officials are considering what to do about the rest of the president's trip. This is to be a 4-day trip in Europe. He's got the NATO summit in Poland. Then he's off to Spain. It wouldn't surprise me if that trip ends up getting cut short. And here in the United States, this was to be a major day on the campaign trail for both Hillary Clinton, who was to be campaigning with Vice President Biden for the first time, and that event has been canceled. Donald Trump has also canceled his campaign events in Florida, which were to include an event with Governor Chris Christie.
Right, but they have put out statements in response to the shootings.
They've put out statements that are remarkably similar, expressing condolences and their concerns for the families involved. Donald Trump's statement showing remarkable restraint, very different than previous statements we have seen, condemning not only the shooting in Dallas, but also condemning the police shootings in Louisiana and Minnesota.
You mentioned their restraint. When we saw President Obama quite early this morning, 5 a.m. Eastern time, you could hear once again that anger in the edge of his voice. Let's listen.
There has been a vicious, calculated, and despicable attack on law enforcement. Police in Dallas were on duty doing their jobs, keeping people safe during peaceful protests. These law enforcement officers were targeted, and nearly a dozen officers were shot. We are horrified over these events, and that we stand united with the people and the police department in Dallas.
John Karl, the president's called upon so many times to speak out in response to killings like these, and one of the problems that's kind of bedeviled his entire administration now coming to the fore again. He's elected to bring people together. That is his signature promise. Going back to 2004 when he made his debut on the national stage, yet we're seeing increasing polarization, increasing hostility.
And it is deeply frustrating to the president. You heard the frustration when he first got to Poland and he made the statement about the shootings in Louisiana, the police shootings in Louisiana and Minnesota. And even as he expressed concerns about racial disparities in law enforcement in that statement, you could hear in his voice and in his words concerns that that would lead to a backlash against law enforcement. So as he condemned the police shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana, or raised concerns about those shootings, he also made it clear that the vast majority of law enforcement officials do extremely important, honorable work and put their lives on the line every day. He talked about black lives mattering, but also blue lives mattering as well.
And Pierre Thomas, I want to bring this to Pierre Thomas as well. This is something you live every day on the front lines there at the Justice Department.
Exactly, George. It is a fact that we're seeing more mass shootings in which 4 or more people are being killed. It is happening with greater regularity. The FBI has put out new data on that recently. And also, this comes against a backdrop of more law enforcement officers being shot and killed. I'm looking at some new data, I think that has been updated today, that says that this time last year, 18 law enforcement officers had been killed at this point. This year, it's 26, a 44% increase. So if you're working in law enforcement, if you're a police officer, you know that this backdrop exists. And to see all those officers killed in this way is devastating. I've talked to a lot of sources this morning who were both upset and concerned about the Minnesota incident in particular, but also the carnage that they saw unfold in Dallas last night.
Yeah, and let me bring that to John Cohen as well. He's also a former police officer, former counterterrorism official with the U.S. government as well. You know, we saw the FBI director, James Comey, actually come out and speak to this earlier in this year and draw some, some tension there with the White House when he talked about what might be the Ferguson effect. Of course, that was the shooting of Michael Brown by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, a couple of years back. Some concern that police might be pulling back from more aggressive policing out of concern that they would get accused of doing something wrong when things do go wrong.
Yeah, George, I mean, that's a real problem. And I've heard from police officers around the country that the environment is so toxic in many communities that they prefer to sit in their cars, respond to calls for services because they don't want to be the next person who becomes the target of social media and other public attention. But here's the bottom line, and we've kind of been touching on it already this morning. We truly have become a nation in crisis. And part of this has to do with police use of force. Part of the problem has to do with the shooting of police officers. But the bottom line problem is that the violence and the anger that exists in so many communities today is spiraling out of control. And until our national leadership takes that on as the problem, we're going to continue to go from event to event to event and reporting on these tragedies.
John talks about that, Sunny Hostin. You've got the anger spiraling out of control. You also have the violence spiraling out of control. And in places like the hardest hit neighborhoods of Chicago or Baltimore or Memphis, you actually need police on those streets.
You do, but along with needing police on the streets, I think you need less violence, you need more tolerance, you need equal treatment, you need police reform and training. And I think the president has really focused on that in these communities. We know that the White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing has done a lot of work, has made a lot of recommendations to try to deal with these issues that we're seeing in communities, in inner cities, communities of color.
It's interesting you bring that up, because earlier this morning at this press conference with the police chief of Dallas, David Brown, and the mayor, Mike Rawlings, the mayor, Mike Rawlings, talked about the fact that Dallas has been a leader in de-escalation. He says they deserve best in class for that. And that came before this quite powerful statement from the police chief, David Brown. Let's take a look at that.
Applauding these brave men and women who do this job under great scrutiny, under great vulnerability, who literally risk their lives to protect our democracy. We don't feel much support most days. Let's not make today most days. Please, we need your support.
He said the city of Dallas is hurting. We've also heard from former President of the United States, George W. Bush. Of course, he lives in Dallas as well, and I'll read a statement that he put out as well. He says that Laura and I have seen firsthand the dedication, professionalism, and courage of the Dallas Police Department. Their commitment to safety and justice makes us proud to call Dallas home. Our hearts go out to all the families of the fallen. We pray for the wounded officers to recover and quickly. And John Carl, let me bring this back to you. You pointed out earlier that the statements today from Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are remarkably similar. The statements from President Obama and President George W. Bush remarkably similar at these times of crisis. The question is, can people stay in league after the initial immediate crisis has passed?
That is the question, and you see in President Obama's statement today, in addition to what he said about the calculated, despicable nature of the attack, he also very briefly raised the issue of guns, and I expect that that will be an issue that the president will hit strongly again, and that becomes the biggest dividing line in this, and that's where you see that agreement break apart quite quickly. The president, after each and every one of these incidents that we have seen in recent months, has come out and said there absolutely must be something done to control access to deadly weapons in the United States, and on that score, he has found very little in common ground with Republicans.
That's right. The latest deadlock coming after, of course, the shootings in Orlando. Calls for gun legislation have stalled in Congress as well. Pierre Thomas, you see that polarization on the issue of guns, but there has been some bipartisan talk, at least, on the whole idea of criminal justice reform.
Starts. George, I think that, the situation is still unfolding. I was just on the phone trying to get some further guidance on when the Attorney General might come out. We think it will be shortly, within the next 15 minutes or so. Again, all of the U.S. law enforcement is locked in on this. The FBI director monitoring the situation, Homeland Security officials monitoring the situation. Everyone seems to know that this is a pivotal moment in law enforcement and policing in general. And I would add, George, that right now, major cities are seeing a surge in homicide and shootings. That is a fact. Many of the victims have been African American. Many of the perpetrators have been African American. But if you framed it solely as a race issue, you would be wrong, because we looked at recent data that showed roughly half of murder victims are white and other races. So the country has a violence problem right now, not just a racial issue going on.
A violence problem that is well put, Pierre, but Sunny Haase, you also do have this issue in the African American community of growing distrust of police officers.
No question about it, and I think there is that convergence between race and policing. But I also think that we need to talk about the type of weaponry that is used in communities of color and communities all around our country. I mean, the president today said that we also know that when people are armed with powerful weapons, they make these attacks more deadly and more tragic. I don't know that we know what kind of weapon was used by this sniper in Dallas, but the bottom line is that AR-15s and AR-15 type weapons are the weapons of choice for mass murderers. So, 5 police officers killed in Dallas. We've got to start the conversation about gun control. We've got to continue the conversation about gun control. And I think that conversation is sort of overlaps with the conversation about race and policing.
That's part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation, we heard it just recently. Just this morning, members of Congress were gathered, and a couple got quite emotional when they were talking about their children, especially African-American members of Congress. You talk about, what do you say to your kids whenever they think about or have the possibility of encountering police officers or encountering violence out in the streets?
It's a very difficult conversation, and I would bet my bottom dollar that every single mother of color, every single family of color has had this conversation if they are raising a young boy of color. As you know, George, I have a 13-year-old son who happens to be almost 6 feet tall. He wanted to go into the city today. I made sure that he stayed at home today, because I think that you aren't doing your job as a parent of color if you don't have these kinds of conversations because of the times that we are living in. Again, our focus, our national focus has been on this election, but the focus of families of color remains on making sure that our children come home.
P.R. Thomas, an issue for mothers and fathers alike.
Exactly, George. I can recall a couple years ago I did a story and we interviewed 2 African-American moms, middle class, college educated, and they talked about the fact that they had this conversation with their young sons who were both honor students every day. And they had conversations about things like, you will not wear a hoodie. You will not have your hands in your pockets when you're walking through a store. If you're pulled over by an officer, you will do as instructed. You will be extremely polite, because the feeling in many African-American homes is that people of color will not get the benefit of the doubt. And so that is a perception that's out there. Not everyone feels that way, but many of these conversations are happening all the time. And I heard Sunny talk about the fact that she's got a 13-year-old who's 6 feet tall. My son is 13 years old, and he's 6 feet tall. And I'm already thinking about just ways to have conversations with him about how he is to comport himself when he's in public.
And it's such a difficult conversation. It's kind of madness that we have to have them so often. And Brad Garrett, I think the other fear right now is that we see this action-reaction cycle. Going out protest, then you have someone lashing out again, going after the police, a counter-reaction to that.
I think it tells you, George, about how many people are up to the fence of, I'm going to commit violence, I'm not going to commit it. And when events trigger whatever their issue is, and they're on the fence, that's when they move. I think that was the situation even with our shooter in Orlando, that he had a trigger that wouldn't have triggered the rest of us, but he was right up to the door. And the key is, do we know about these people? I'm going to be willing to bet if Mr. Johnson is a lone shooter, that he's probably not on anybody's significant radar, that he was out there. He's probably got some mental health issues, I'm going to guess, but that, boy, if you don't know they are there and they stay below the radar in planning these things and they do them alone, it's a tough road for law enforcement.
And John Cohen, this is something you had to deal with every day when you were in the counterterrorism center. This was a lone wolf. It appears as if we take him at his word, motivated by the desire to kill white people, not related to any kind of foreign terrorism at all. But we also have the same problem with people who might be inspired by ISIS going underground, escaping detection as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, George. I mean, one of the disturbing trends we've seen in this country over the past several years is the growing number of people who are vulnerable or predisposed to violence, who use something that's in the public discourse as the motivating grievance to go out and not just try to hurt 1 or 2 people, but to harm as many people as possible. It's a problem of intense concern for law enforcement, and we only have to look back over the last 7 months where we've had 3 major mass casualty attacks, maybe all motivated with for different reasons, but all with horrific, tragic results.
And you know, you see these different kinds of events, and it creates such a dilemma. You know, coming out of Ferguson and the other issues where police encountered unarmed men or seemed to overreact at a time, you have all these calls for pulling back from military-style policing, this de-escalation that the mayor of Dallas was talking about earlier this morning. And at the same time, as we're looking at these scenes from last night, when you've got a sniper or snipers up above, elevated last night, and the police aren't protected like that, they're sitting ducks.
Well, you raised several good points. One, we are increasingly polarized, not only as a nation, but in our communities. And the only way we're going to solve the problems that Sonny and Pierre were referencing is when community and police come together to try to bring about change. Secondly, you know, there's been a lot of debate about the use of military-type equipment by law enforcement. And certainly there are times when it's absolutely inappropriate and threatening for law enforcement to come out in certain types of battle gear. But now, look, we have law enforcement having to deal with heavily armed individuals who are seeking to kill as many people as possible. They're using explosives, they're using high-powered weapons, and we need to make sure that our law enforcement is prepared from a training perspective and from an equipment perspective to deal with that problem.
Okay, John Cohn, thanks. We do now have that video of the press conference I was referencing just a few minutes ago, Congressional Black Caucus press conference, and Congressman Mark Veazey, who represents Dallas-Fort Worth, spoke.
I got to tell you, I have a 10-year-old son.
Take your time. Take your time.
He's more like his mom. He's looks like both of us, but he's more like his mom. And right now, he's a cute 5th grader. He's going into the 5th grade. He's a cute 5th grader. But I worry about him when he gets older, when he gets into high school. What if he's out with some friends and he smarts off the wrong way? And I just don't want anything to happen to him just because maybe he shoots off or maybe he doesn't do something that someone doesn't like and have something happen to him. That could be prevented with just better understanding between the community and the police department. And just because I want that for my son does not mean that I don't support the police 100%. Without the police, we would have anarchy in the streets. We would have no order, and the country that we live in wouldn't be the country that we know today, where we have a free press, where we have freedom of speech, where we have the right to gather and protest.
Congressman Mark Veazey right there, and Sonny, you heard the emotion in his voice right there. We heard the emotion in your voice. This is a conversation that is going to be happening in the family, every African-American family in the country.
No question about it. The conversation, I think, continues. It started certainly with Trayvon Martin and continued with Eric Garner and Sandra Bland. It continues now after, you know, the shootings in Minnesota, the police shooting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And again, you wouldn't be a good parent of color if you didn't have these kinds of conversations. But I also want to make the point, George, that I agree with the congressman. We would have anarchy without police officers. I am a lawyer. We are a nation of laws. And I think that 99% of the officers out there that I worked with when I was a prosecutor are doing the right thing. They are wearing their uniform proudly. They get into the business of policing because they want to help communities. But there are those officers that have poor judgment, that don't do the right thing, that probably shouldn't be wearing the uniform. And I think we need to have those conversations not only within our communities and within our families, but also with the good 99% of police officers that need to start outing the 1% of police officers that are not doing the right thing, because we all pay the price.
We all do pay the price. And John Cohen, we also heard the congressman there talking about our First Amendment rights. In this situation, and we know this so deeply, rhetoric does matter. Rhetoric can inspire violence. Rhetoric can help de-escalate it.
That's right. I mean, the concern we have is that you have these people who are predisposed to violence. They hear what's going on in the political discourse. yes, people need to be able to express themselves, and in these situations, people are emotional and passionate, and we need to continue and embrace that. But at the same time, we need to understand that words have meaning with those who are predisposed to violence, who are psychologically vulnerable to committing an act of violence, and who are just one event away from conducting a violent attack.
And John Cohn, take us inside top levels of the Justice Department on a day like this. When something like this happens, you see something like this happen in Dallas. We've already heard from Pierre Thomas, police departments all across the country on alert, on edge. What precisely would you all be looking for after an event like this?
Well, first and foremost, we would be seeing what support the local governments need from the standpoint of law enforcement personnel and other support. Second, we would be providing investigative support to determine whether, what was the motive behind this attack, and are there other people who may be involved who need to be located and apprehended. Those would be in the short term what the discussions would focus on. But as we were discussing earlier, hopefully there is a growing awareness that we have a major national situation that needs to become first and forefront at the forefront of our policy debate. So other elements of justice, like community-oriented policing offices, will be thinking through what they can do from a program and policy perspective to have an impact on that.
A major national situation, a major national crisis right now. Ground zero tonight, today, Dallas, Texas, where 14 people were shot at overnight, 5 police officers killed. We're waiting for the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to come speak and address this matter, and we will come back as soon as she appears.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
We get into programming. Do you need this?
I don't need it. The third deadly shooting in as many days. This time, officers killed during peaceful protests in Dallas. Local police may change protocol in response to these deadly shootings. And he was found emaciated and dehydrated. How an abused puppy is doing today.
ABC 27 News at noon starts now.
There are no words to describe the atrocity that occurred to our city. All I know is that this must stop. This divisiveness.